I'm Ricky.
And I'm Joe, and this is Season 6, Episode 17 of the Beer and Broadband Podcast, slated to come out on October 30th, 2023, and this is our Halloween episode. So, we got scary topics, terrifying brews, and not really, because we never do anything that's actually scary. But we're going to be drinking today the California Ace limited release craft cider Pumpkin. It's a 5% ABV cider, going kind of back to the roots of some of the first things that we tried on Beer and Broadband, getting back to some California stuff and bumping mics and trying ciders, but also fall time, little pumpkin spice in there. So let's see what Ricky thinks. He's taking a couple big swigs there.
Yeah, I mean, it's tasty. It's very odd. It's like a little bit of a sour, funky sort of apple cider that they've just put a bunch of fall spices into, which just kind of compounds onto that like funky sourness to it.
Yeah.
Like it is sweet. It's objectively sweet, but it doesn't really taste sweet because of all the spices and the other stuff in it. Like in the sense that very few sweet ciders are not sweet forward, where this is almost like funk forward.
It is funk forward. It is spice forward. The there is no like pumpkin flavor that I pull out. But there is like, okay, so the pumpkin mead that I made a couple years ago when it first came out, when we racked it first into bottles and we first drank some of it. It had like it was kind of thin and watery, and the pumpkin flavor really didn't come out. But at the end, it had like this kind of like note that goes up.
Yeah.
And it's like just a particular earthy note that pumpkin has. That's the only thing I taste in it, and it's at the very, very end.
Yeah, there's a little tiny bit, but I like to try and judge it based off if I hadn't heard what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
I think that's very hard for anyone to pull out, and I think I would be. Like, if I put this in front of someone and said, do you think this is pumpkin? Like, do you think this is a pumpkin cider? Or this is an apple pie cider? They would say apple pie almost every time.
I agree. I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm just more saying, like, if there was a pumpkin note in there, that's where it would be.
Yeah,
that's
at
true. The very end. The label says, subtle aromas of pumpkin, ideal for Halloween and Thanksgiving, which is traditionally cider time. Enjoy. And it's got no sugar added. So I don't know how much sugar it's got in it. Yeah, 13 grams of carbohydrates per bottle. 11 total sugars. It's not too bad. I mean, if you're like, as far as sweet as it tastes, it's not as sweet. It's not like 30 grams or something like that.
Yeah, well, I think you're allowed to use concentrates and not call that added sugar.
Yeah,
you're like, I didn't back sweeten it. I just started with a very sweet, like concentrated apple.
I think that's probably what they did here.
Yeah,
and probably some sort of Granny Smith.
I missed it. Yeah, what was the ABV on this?
5%.
5%. Okay, yeah.
It's not too bad. It's nicely carbonated. I mean, there's a lot of things that I like about it. It's it doesn't have the acidity that a lot of ciders have too.
Yeah,
which
that's
makes
true.
it nice.
It's certainly not bad. I think I would like it more if it had just a little bit of vanilla in it. At that point, it is pretty much just like a apple pie cider. But I would be okay with that.
I agree. Yeah,
it needs a little bit more of a mellow spice in it to round it out a bit more. It's a little sharp.
It is a little sharp. I think the problem with the fall spices and them calling it pumpkin is it denotes that it should taste a certain way. So I wouldn't mind the sharpness if I was drinking it specifically to have like that sort of like extra fall flavor, and it's just not quite there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd probably be truer to advertising just to call it a fall cider.
Right.
Again, not trying to say they're lying. There could be some pumpkin in there, but it's certainly not very detectable.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, it's only that earthy note at the end that I think is there. So let's talk about Microsoft. 2 times.
Mm-hmm.
This is our scary topic, by the way. Not really, but so Microsoft was audited by the IRS, and the IRS determined that they owe $29 billion in back taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for a company who makes like 3 times that in a year, that's not that
It's way more.
terribly much money. Yeah, per year. They over the 10 years that they've accrued these back taxes, I think from the article that I read.
It was like 2004 to 2013, and in
Yeah.
that time they made something like 192 billion.
Right, something like that. So like they made a ton of money, and they've had capital expenses and things like that. So they don't retain all that money, but they probably have this money to give back. So I'm not a tax lawyer or anything like that. That's not really my thing. But it does kind of feel like when you look at a corporation like that, and they're trying to do, just good business, and their good business is to make as much money as possible. So, but it does kind of feel like there's some sort of loophole that we've created in our society, in our American society, possibly Western society, where corporations are just kind of able to sidestep that stuff. They don't really have to invest back into the infrastructure that allows them to continue to exist.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's all our tax system is loopholes.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the problem with it, is it is so obscenely complex, and there are so many little loopholes that get put into it, and there's so much backing for private interests and things like the Congress and stuff like that, that, what happened with this is Microsoft took a bunch of their intellectual properties and sold it, like other U.S. intellectual properties, and sold them to their Puerto Rican branch.
Yeah.
Because they had a more favorable tax over there. So it's basically shifting company money around so that now, because Puerto Rico owns the intellectual rights, when they're shipping you CDs of Microsoft Office and things like that, that income counts as having come out of Puerto Rico, where they don't pay as many taxes.
Right.
And it's stuff like that the IRS is arguing, hey, that was purely a tax move, that wasn't a business move, that's just shifting money, you can't do that.
Right.
Microsoft is saying, no, we had reasons to do that. And it goes back and forth. And look, I'll say this, because I did a lot of research on this topic. I think what tells us how bad taxes have gotten in America is that the way they were able to get this audit, and were able to continue to push through this audit that they've been working on now for almost like 20 years, is they hired a private law firm.
Yeah.
The IRS did not do this audit. They hired someone else to do it because their funding's so bad. And granted, there's some things have passed recently that'll make the funding better. And, we have done some things. Trump passed a new tax law, and I think it was 2017, that has had Microsoft have to already pay back about $10 billion in taxes.
Right.
Because it increased basically how much. Basically, the gist of that law was, hey, you are an American company. You're registered in America. I know you are doing things overseas. You still have to pay us a little bit for that stuff.
Yeah.
So that saw some of the back tax already paid. So they only have to pay like $19 billion.
Yeah.
If it goes through. But, they're talking about this going to an appeals court.
Yeah.
That's the appeals within the IRS, which generally they cut you a break. Very few of appeals actually go all the way through, because the IRS would rather get some money than potentially lose the appeal. And that's a private court. That's not public. So you can't even see what happens there. And that's the big issue for me on all this, is like, if we just had a more simplified tax code that we close a bunch of loopholes on, I think the argument people make is, well, an easier tax code is probably less efficient in terms of number of dollars it can potentially extract. But I think you have a lot less of this.
Yeah, you do.
A lot less of $29 billion going not into the system. Because at a certain point, you say, okay, if I had a simplified tax code, they wouldn't have paid necessarily $29 billion. Maybe they would have only paid $15 billion. But they still would have paid it.
But I mean,
they wouldn't have anywhere to hide.
You're also getting $15 billion back into your economy that they've tried to keep out of the economy.
Well, look, I'll even say this: and this was kind of the same thing that happened when I forget if it was after he got elected or shortly before he got elected, where they got a hold of Trump's tax records, because that made a huge break of like, look at all your companies who are not paying their fair share of taxes, and he clapped back saying, I'm 100% is paying my fair share of taxes. The problem is you've got 800 loopholes, and I'd be an idiot not to use them.
Right.
And that's true. We've allowed, special interests to force loopholes into our tax code for decades.
Yep.
To the point that they can play this game that it takes 10, almost 20 years to audit a company. That's ridiculous. How much money did the IRS spend and send to this private law firm to even do this audit? It must be a massive amount of money.
It probably was.
Or the law firm's going to get a big chunk of that, 29 billion, or I guess 19 billion now. So it's like, come on. It doesn't have to be like this. Tax, I forget, it's some ludicrous number. It's like 500-600 pages is how long the tax code is.
Yeah, it's an insane amount, and it only the loopholes that are there really only benefit the very wealthy and businesses.
Yeah, and they do. And it a lot of it I think boils down to income tax, which is a very poorly thought out tax.
Yeah.
Because it was an emergency tax from the World Wars.
Right.
It is very hard to accurately assess someone's income, especially when you start throwing in multinational companies that are getting income from lots of different places.
Mm-hmm.
Because, technically, if Ricky gives you, Joe, one of my video games, that video game counts as income for you.
Right.
No one ever records that stuff. It's a nightmare to keep track of, of like who owes what and who doesn't. Whereas like we could just say, which a lot of states have said, it's like there's not an income tax here. Instead, we have a more comprehensive sales tax.
Yeah. More comprehensive sales tax or more comprehensive property tax or something like that.
Yeah. Because like, look, property tax by itself is probably not enough.
Yeah.
I understand that, our government has gotten way much larger than it can handle just doing all the stuff it needs to do off property tax. But like, Tennessee, where my family grew up, no income tax. It's all just sales tax, which means, sales is real easy.
Yep.
Sales is real easy to keep track
pretty
of.
easy. Yep.
You say, hey, you're a registered business, therefore when you sell something, you get a percent of it. Their sales tax is high. It's something like 9%, maybe 10% almost. But if, you have your own little garden, the food you garden doesn't count as income, which it would for other places. Unless which is hard for a home gardener to do. A home gardener need to worry about it because you'd have to get more value in your produce than you put into it. And home gardens are notorious for being not money efficient. Very rarely you, commercial wise, get as much produce. You get better quality produce, but it's not cheaper produce.
Right.
So I don't know. I'm interested to see where it goes. It'll go to appeal. We'll eventually figure out what it was. But I mean, this is where we're at. This was all about a business decision made in 2004.
Yep.
It's 2023, and now they're going to appeal, and that'll take a couple more years.
Yep.
Whatever Microsoft owes, they're not going to owe until like 2028 or later.
And the value of that money, because the way we do inflation, is just so much less now than it was before.
That's a decent point. Because the $29 billion also includes fees and fines for hiding the money.
Right.
So I don't know if that's quite as much of a concern. I don't know what the breakdown is. So it could be like raw money they owed like 20, and they've got $9 billion in fines or whatever that try to make up the inflation difference or something. But it's certainly
still like it's this. The money's not worth as much. We've got a society that's built off of concepts that are not changing fast enough. And they're not moving with the society's needs necessarily.
Yeah, because it's all too complex. I mean, the idea, like, pitch that to somebody. Like, walk up to somebody on the street and said, hey, in 2004, I did something that makes you think I owe you $20 billion. Are you okay if we spend the next 20 years litigating that? They would say, no, that's ludicrous.
You owe me $20 billion. You need to give me $20 billion.
You loan somebody $100 and they expect it back in a month or two.
Yep.
And like, it's a real easy system. That's an incredible amount of money to be tied up in red tape.
Yep.
And the more we try and say, oh, we're going to reform the tax code by putting in 5 or 6 new passages. No, you need to start ripping passages out. Like, we need to get the tax code down to like 20, 30 pages, which is what it was.
Yeah,
like,
it used
people
to be.
say that and they're like, that's impossible. It's like, no, it's not. Taxes used to be incredibly simple because we didn't have a different tax for every different type of product.
Yep.
You know, like, go buy a bunch of different stuff from a bunch of different stores and notice how your tax rate is different. Even on sales tax, it's a simpler tax.
And that's at a state level. That's not even like at a federal level necessarily.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But, the federal, they treat income that same way. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, what products did you sell? Okay, those are taxed at these rates. And what percentage of this did you make? Okay, those are taxed at those rates. And now we got to deal with tariffs. So how much money did you actually make because you sold it overseas?
Yeah.
And, I saw there's a push to do a new digital tax.
Yeah.
Which the idea is to help with stuff like this, because what you're saying is just globally, I don't care where you are, if you're Microsoft and you sell, copies of Office in Guatemala, you owe 2% on a digital good.
Right.
It's just universally.
Because you're an American company, it doesn't matter if you sell it overseas, you owe 2%. Period.
Yeah, it's something like that. I haven't gotten into the super fine details of it. But again, this is us making a new tax to put on top of the not working tax system to try and make up for the fact the tax system isn't working very well. It's just Band-Aid after Band-Aid after Band-Aid because it's easy to pass a Band-Aid. I think it's a lot harder to get people to agree to do a full reform, but it's what needs to happen.
Yep.
But, at the same time, this whole Microsoft thing, the IRS was pushing for them not to give them an appeal, but Congress went crazy about that because there's so many lobbyists for Microsoft out there. They're like, what do you mean they can't get an appeal? That's insane. Now they're getting their appeal.
Yep.
So probably the same thing would happen. Like just very recently, just literally, I think yesterday or the day before, there was, the SEC has put in a new rule that I think takes effect in like 60, 90 days, something like that. That basically if you're short on a company, you've got, either through swaps or derivatives, or you're actually just short of a particular stock or a resource, you have to report that to the SEC. You have to report how much and like who you're borrowing it from and everything else. And there were several people in Congress and the Senate that pushed against that. Like you can't do that.
You can't do that. That would destroy our system.
That makes accountability.
Yeah, that makes everybody have to know everything, and you don't want to blah blah blah. Yeah, I saw that too.
Yeah, it's crazy how many of our elected politicians fight against reform for transparency.
Well, I mean, okay, so this is a bit of a bunny rabbit, and we may not actually get to the next topic this time, but it's another spoopy topic, but just knowing how Congress works, you think these people are sitting in the Senate or at one of these, committees or something like that when they've said that they're going to go there. They don't. They don't even show up until the end, and then they just go in and say what they're going to say.
Yeah, they just show up to the...
Yeah, so like you may have a panel of people that come up there and they're presenting before, supposedly these senators, and half the senators or more are not even in the room.
Yeah.
They're not listening to them. They don't care what the people say, and then they come in at the very end, and things that you've already agreed on are like things that you're like, yeah, we can totally agree that that's a bad thing, and we should not. That should not even be something that's debated. They'll bring that debate back up just because they don't know what the crap you talked about.
Yep. It's a terrible system. We've really done a poor job of keeping, frankly, just what it is corruption.
Yeah.
Because we allow things like lobbying and things to happen, and we allow people to vote for. Okay, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. Like, we are not a democracy; we're a republic.
Yeah.
So we elect people to basically pass laws for us, and that's a high trust system.
Right.
Like, that would be me saying, it's like, you know what? I'm not going to vote on anything. Joe, you're allowed to make all my votes because, Joe, I trust you. And, Joe, I do trust you. So I would actually, think you would do a pretty good job at that.
Maybe.
But what we're doing on a national level is saying, hey, we think this random politician can go make all of those votes. And, sure, you can not elect them next time.
Right.
Sure, if they do something crazy, you can get them kicked out. You can, do whatever, different for every branch of the government. But you can go through some process to end their term early. But still, at the end of the day, I don't know too many people who have trust in politicians anymore to say that they would let them make every vote for them.
No, but that's the way our system's set up, and it made sense when we originally set it up. Because we didn't, like, we were so spread out, you couldn't like have direct interaction.
Well, there's still something to be said for a republic, because the idea would be, hey, every random person does not know the nuances of law, and it's easy to name a bill, free puppies, and what it actually means is, puppies are not free, they're property, and therefore you will be taxed for every pet you have. There's all sorts of that junk that gets put into bills. So you need someone who's educated in it. But when we let companies just say, hey, look, yeah, we're going to lobby for this, I'm going to pay 40% of your campaign or whatever like that. Like, just look at how much politicians' net worth is versus what it was when they went into office.
Absolutely.
The richest person in the county my parents grew up in was a politician. He was penniless when he started.
Yeah.
He was a poor man elected for being a poor man who would represent them in the government. He's now the richest man in the county.
Yep.
What does that tell you? The man only gets paid like $100,000 or something like that, and he's a millionaire now.
Yep.
So you tell me how you get paid $100,000
and you become a millionaire.
You become multimillionaire. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a more complex topic than we have time to sort out in 20 minutes. But I think ultimately, us just babbling on about it doesn't actually solve the problem. Someone has to actually go in and solve the issue.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to taxes and our government kind of being in the position that it's in, from a real standing outside looking in, whether you're outside of the US or you're in the US, but you're you really can't be involved in this. You're only kind of exist where it is. It literally is so complex that one human being cannot navigate it.
No, yeah, you can't. And I think the first step is really just a lot of framing. I mean, you go and read almost any article about this. It either is completely neutral or it's framing it from Microsoft did a bad thing.
Right.
And, I do think that is debatable on whether what they did was bad in a legal sense. In a moralistic sense, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely bad.
It makes no sense that you sold most of your intellectual property rights to a factory with 85 people in it.
Yeah.
But
a factory you own with 85 people in it.
Yeah. But the fact that you could do that, and that was allowed and was not immediately blocked because of how bad the system is, I think is a lot of times the system trying to hide how bad it is.
Yeah.
Is saying, no, this person broke the law. People understand crime. They understand, hey, you did something you weren't supposed to do. But, this is much more of you were allowed to do it. Maybe you didn't report it right, but you were 100% allowed to do it.
And this probably should be a crime. And what we've been taught is that, someone standing on the street corner, looking suspicious that maybe has a gun in their pocket is a criminal. Not a person who, sits in a boardroom and makes a decision like this.
Oh, yeah.
Even though they're probably about equally as harmful to our society. Yeah. That's probably another topic for another day. Now that I thought about it, I'm like, that might be a good topic for the next episode or the episode after next. We could kind of get into that. We were going to talk about the Activision Blizzard, merger with Microsoft since I was on the Microsoft topic, but this ended up being a little bit longer than I thought it would be. So yeah, do you have anything else you want to say about that?
No, I think I've ranted enough.
I knew when I saw it, I was like, oh, this is right up Ricky's alley. He is going to have a lot of words to say about this particular topic. Yeah, so fun talk. There's a book that you should probably read or listen to the audiobook of called Weapons of Math's Destruction, which it is kind of about some of these concepts.
Yeah.
It's about how algorithms push harm into society because we don't do some things that we should do.
Oh, yeah.
But either way, this has been Season 6, Episode 17 of the Beer and Broadband Podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Happy Halloween.